There is a particular kind of person who walks into a room and, without a single word, changes the temperature of it. You have met one. You may be one. They are the ones who feel the sadness behind a stranger's smile before that stranger has said a single word. They are the ones who cry at the pain of people they have never met. They are the ones who can be surrounded by 100 people and still sense with total clarity which single person in that room is suffering the most, and will walk toward that person every time without knowing why. If you are this kind of person, I want to tell you something before we go any further, and I want you to sit with it rather than rush past it. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive. You are not weak. And you are not imagining things when you say that certain people leave you exhausted after 10 minutes in a way that has nothing to do with what was said. Something is happening to you when you are near certain people, something real, something that has a shape, a mechanism, a logic, and until you understand that logic, you will keep mistaking your own depth for a defect. This is a warning, not a comforting one. I will not spend the next hour telling you that you are special and that the universe has chosen you for some luminous purpose, though I do believe something like that is true. I am going to tell you instead what happens in the dark, underneath the surface of your kindness, in the places where your compassion is not received as a gift, but consumed as a resource. I am going to tell you why certain people are drawn to you the way a starving thing is drawn to warmth. And I am going to tell you plainly what you must do about it, because if you do not, the very quality that makes you rare will be the quality that hollows you out. Listen closely. This will not take long, and it may be the most important hour you spend on yourself this year. Let us begin with a simple observation, one so obvious that most people walk past it their entire lives without ever turning to look at it directly. Every human being carries two lives. There is the life we show, the face we have practiced, the voice we have smoothed, the self we have edited for public approval, and there is the life we hide, the parts of us that we were taught very early were unacceptable, the rage, the envy, the greed, the cruelty, the need, the shame. Every child arrives in the world whole, and every child is slowly, patiently carved down into something socially presentable. The pieces that get cut away do not disappear. They cannot disappear. They go underground. They form a second personality, a shadow self, living just beneath the visible one, and it grows in the dark, the way anything grows in the dark, twisted, hungry, and unseen even by the person carrying it. This is not a flaw in a few unfortunate people. This is the condition of nearly every human being who has ever lived. We are all walking around with a basement we have never entered, filled with everything we refused to become. Now here is the part that most people never learn, and it is the part that will explain every draining relationship you have ever had. A person who has never gone down into their own basement, who has never turned the light on and faced what is living there, does not get to simply keep it locked away forever. The energy of that hidden self has to go somewhere. It cannot be paid in cash to its owner because its owner refuses to acknowledge the debt. So it looks for another currency. It looks for someone else to carry it, express it, absorb it, feel it, someone who will do, unconsciously, the emotional labor that the unintegrated person refuses to do consciously. And who does it find? It finds you. It finds the person in the room whose nervous system is open. It finds the person who has spent a lifetime becoming exquisitely attuned to the emotional weather of others. Because somewhere back in childhood, reading the emotional weather of a parent or a household was not a luxury, it was survival. It finds the person whose boundaries were never taught, never modeled, never protected, because they were too busy sensing what everyone else needed and became fluent in everyone's pain except their own. This is not a metaphor I am reaching for to make a pleasant story. This is a mechanism. It has a name in the old language of the psyche: projection. A person who cannot bear to feel their own shame will project it outward and search, often without any conscious awareness that they are doing so, for someone who will absorb it, feel it for them, carry it so they don't have to. And the people who make the best receptacles for this unconscious traffic are, without exception, the most emotionally porous people in the room. That is you. That is why you are chosen. Not because you are weak, because you are permeable, and permeability in a world full of people running from themselves is treated as an opportunity. I want you to understand something about the word feed, because I used it in the very title of what I am telling you, and I do not use it lightly. When I say that certain people feed on your light, I do not mean this as poetry. I mean that there is a real transaction of psychic energy that takes place between two people in any relationship. And in a healthy relationship, this transaction runs in both directions. You give and you receive. You are depleted by someone's need, and you are also replenished by their care, their reciprocity, their attention to your own inner weather. But there is a category of person, and you already know several of them by name. Their faces are already appearing in your mind as I speak, for whom this transaction only runs one way. They arrive depleted and they leave restored. You arrive intact and you leave hollow. Every conversation with them follows the same secret architecture. Their crisis becomes the room's only weather system. Their pain becomes the only pain permitted airtime. And your own inner life, if you dare to mention it, is met with a flicker of impatience before the subject rotates inevitably back to them. You have called this exhausting. You have wondered if you are simply too tired, too stressed, too in your head to keep up with them. I am telling you now, you were never too tired. You were being fed upon, and your body knew it long before your mind was willing to say the word. This is why you can spend 3 hours with one person and feel more alive at the end than you did at the beginning, energized, curious, expanded, and spend 45 minutes with another person and feel afterward as though something has been siphoned out of you through a straw you never saw. The difference between those two people is not charisma. It is not intelligence. It is whether they have done the work of meeting their own darkness, or whether they are still silently sending the bill for it to whoever in the room is generous enough to pick up the tab, and you, empath sensitive one, old soul, you have been picking up that tab your entire life. You picked it up before you had a name for what you were doing. You picked it up as a child, in a household where somebody's mood governed the emotional climate of every room, and you learned brilliantly, adaptively, tragically, to make yourself small and available and soothing, because a peaceful household depended on it. That was not a personality trait you were born with in isolation. That was a survival strategy forged under pressure, and it worked so well that you have never stopped using it. Even now, decades later, with people who are not your parents, in situations that are not emergencies, where the stakes of disappointing someone are not, in fact, your safety. This is the wound underneath the gift. I want you to hear this clearly, because it is the hinge on which everything else in this hour turns. Your empathy is real, and your empathy is also, in its current unexamined form, a wound wearing the costume of a virtue. Until you can tell the difference between the two, you will keep mistaking your own exhaustion for love, and you will keep calling your depletion compassion, and you will keep letting people who have never once asked how you are doing walk away from you lighter, while you walk away heavier every single time. Let me tell you about the moth and the flame, because it is an old image, almost too old, almost worn smooth from overuse, and yet it is exact, and I would rather use an exact image that sounds familiar than a novel one that misses the mark. The moth is not evil. Understand this before anything else. The moth does not choose with malice to fly into the fire. The moth is following an ancient navigational instinct, tuned over millions of years to steer by the moon and the stars, and it mistakes your light, your particular, hard-won, luminous warmth, for something to navigate by, something to orient its entire chaotic flight around. It does not know it is drawn to something that will burn it, and it does not know that the very quality it needs, warmth, closeness, illumination, is available to it in a form that would not destroy either of you both. It has simply never learned the difference between a flame that consumes and a light that simply shines. You are not required to be everyone's moon. I say this to you with as much tenderness as I can put into a warning. You are not required to keep your light burning at the exact size and exposure that makes you edible to every lost thing that flies toward you. You can be warm without being consumable. You can be radiant without being a resource. This is the distinction almost no one teaches the sensitive, and it is the distinction that will save your life. I do not use that phrase carelessly. I have watched across many years and many consulting rooms what happens to gifted feeling, luminous people who never learn this distinction. They do not die dramatically. They die slowly, in installments, giving away a little more of themselves in every relationship until one day they look in the mirror and do not recognize the exhausted stranger looking back. That is a kind of death too. I do not want it for you. Now I must say something that will be uncomfortable, because the whole of what I am telling you will be useless without it. The people who feed on you are not, in most cases, monsters. This is the hardest part to accept, because it would be so much simpler if they were. If the ones who drained you were simply villains, you could identify them, avoid them, warn others about them, and be done with the matter. But most of the people who drain the empath are not conscious predators. They are unconscious ones. They are, in the vast majority of cases, people who are themselves in terrible pain, carrying their own unexamined shadow, repeating patterns they inherited from households as wounding as the one you survived. And they are doing to you exactly what was done to them, using you the way they were once used, without any awareness that this is what is happening. This does not mean you owe them your continued presence. Understand this distinction with total clarity, because it is where so many sensitive people go astray. Understanding why someone hurts you is not the same as being obligated to keep absorbing that hurt. You can hold enormous compassion for the wounded child still living inside the person across from you, and still refuse, with total resolve, to let that wounded child spend the rest of your life eating your peace. Compassion for someone's wound does not require you to become the wound's permanent caretaker. There is, however, a smaller category, smaller but real and worth naming precisely because sensitive people are so often told it does not exist. Of those who are not simply unconscious repeaters of their own wounding, but who have learned, quite deliberately, that people like you are useful. They have learned that your guilt can be activated with a certain tone of voice. They have learned that your fear of conflict can be leveraged to avoid ever taking responsibility for their own behavior. They have learned that if they perform just enough vulnerability, you will do backflips to spare them the discomfort they claim to feel, while your own discomfort is never once considered relevant. These people are rarer than the first kind, but they exist, and no amount of your understanding, your patience, your carefully worded compassion will ever cause them to stop, because stopping was never the goal of the relationship for them. Being fed was the goal. I want you to be able to recognize this pattern without shame, without wondering what is wrong with you for having attracted it, because I promise you, nothing is wrong with you. You were simply generous in a world that has not yet learned to protect its generous ones. So what do? This is the part that most people who talk about empaths and energy vampires skip entirely, because it is easier to describe the wound than to prescribe the medicine, and because the medicine, when it is honest, is not comfortable. But I did not come here to make you comfortable. I came here to make you free. And freedom, in this particular matter, requires something that will feel, at first, like a betrayal of everything you believe about yourself. You must learn to withhold. Say that word to yourself. Withhold. It will feel, if you are the kind of person I have been describing this entire hour, almost physically wrong to hear it, as though I have asked you to stop breathing or stop being yourself. Your entire identity may have been built, brick by brick since childhood, on the foundation of being endlessly available, endlessly understanding, endlessly ready to absorb whatever emotional weather walks through the door. The idea of withholding your empathy, your presence, your light from someone who is clearly suffering may strike you as a kind of cruelty you are not capable of. I am not asking you to withhold your compassion from the world. I am asking you to stop confusing compassion with unconditional access. These are not the same thing, though you have likely never been taught the difference. You can feel enormous compassion for a person and still close the door. You can hold someone in your heart with total tenderness and still refuse to let them back into your kitchen at midnight for the fourth time this month to unload a crisis that never resolves, because resolving it was never actually the point. Compassion is a feeling, access is a choice. You are permitted to separate them. This begins with a discipline so simple that it will sound almost insultingly small, and yet I have watched it change lives. Before you respond to anyone's need, pause and ask yourself a single question. Not, what do they need from me? Which is the question you have been asking your entire life, automatically, unconsciously, the way you breathe. Ask instead, what is this costing me? And am I willing to pay it freely, right now, in this moment, without resentment? If the honest answer is yes, give freely, give fully, give with your whole open heart, because that giving, chosen consciously, is one of the most beautiful things a human being can do. And I would never ask you to close yourself off from that beauty. But if the honest answer is no, if some part of you is already exhausted before you have even opened your mouth, if some part of you is already rehearsing the resentment you will feel 3 hours from now, then you must have the courage to say no, out loud, without a paragraph of apology attached to it. This will feel, the first several times you do it, like committing a small act of violence against your own nature. It is not. It is the first act of a nature finally being permitted to have edges. Here is the second discipline, and it is harder than the first, because it requires you to look not outward at the people who drain you, but inward at the reason you have let them. You must go down into your own basement. I told you, near the beginning of this hour, that every human being carries a shadow self, a second personality made of everything they were taught to reject, and that this shadow does not disappear simply because it is denied. It goes underground and grows there, unseen, until it finds a way to express itself, usually through the very people who least deserve to carry it. I want you to understand something now that will complete the circle. You have a shadow too. Yes, you, the empath, the sensitive one, the giver, the light. You have spent so long identifying with your luminous qualities, your kindness, your intuition, your bottomless capacity to feel what others feel, that you may have quietly convinced yourself that you are only that you are the good one, that your entire identity is made of warmth and light and giving, and that darkness is a foreign country belonging only to the people who drain you. This is the most dangerous illusion an empath can carry. And to say this to you with the full weight of everything I have learned in a lifetime of sitting with suffering people. Anyone who believes they have no darkness has simply not yet met it. Your shadow does not disappear because your conscious identity is built around kindness. It goes underground exactly the way everyone else's does, and in your case, it often takes a very particular shape. It becomes rage that you never express because you were taught that your anger was dangerous or unbecoming or simply too much for the people around you to bear. It becomes resentment that curdles silently for years because you kept saying yes when your whole body was screaming no. It becomes a martyrdom you are secretly, unconsciously proud of, a quiet, poisonous satisfaction in being the one who always gives, always understands, always forgives, because it lets you feel superior to the very people who exhaust you, even while you complain about the exhaustion. I am not telling you this to shame you. I am telling you this because until you claim this shadow as your own, the rage, the resentment, the buried need to be seen and cared for exactly as fiercely as you see and care for others, you will keep unconsciously seeking out people who will express your anger for you since you have refused to express it yourself. You will keep choosing draining, chaotic, demanding people again and again in different bodies and different names and calling it bad luck, when in fact it is your own unclaimed darkness walking back toward you, wearing someone else's face because it has nowhere else to go. The work then is not simply to build a wall against the people who feed on you. The deeper work, the work almost no one wants to do, because it is the work of true transformation rather than mere protection, is to become whole, to stop being only the light and start becoming the entire person, light and shadow both, kindness and anger both, generosity and boundary both. A whole person is far harder to feed on than a person who has split themselves into an acceptable half and a rejected half, because a whole person's energy does not leak out through the seams of a repressed anger they have never let themselves feel. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice, because I do not want to leave you with a beautiful idea and no path toward it. It looks like feeling your anger fully, in your own body, in private if necessary, without performing it for anyone and without apologizing for its existence. Rage that has been suppressed for 30 years does not evaporate because you have decided to be spiritual about your suffering. It sits in the tissue of the body, it shapes the posture, it leaks out sideways as passive resignation or sudden inexplicable exhaustion, and it will keep doing so until you've let yours feel it directly, name it honestly, and let it move through you the way weather moves through a landscape, arriving, doing its necessary work, and passing on. It looks like grieving the childhood in which you first learned that your own needs were an inconvenience. This is not self-pity. This is the beginning of self-possession. You cannot reclaim a self you have never mourned the loss of. It looks like practicing, deliberately and awkwardly at first, the sentence, I need something from you. Not, I'm sorry to bother you, but if it's not too much trouble. Not a question disguised as an apology. A direct statement of need delivered without flinching, the same way you have delivered 1,000 offers of help to other people without flinching. If that sentence is difficult for you to say, and for most people like you, it is agonizing the first several times, that difficulty is itself the map. It shows you exactly where the old wound lives and exactly where the healing work must begin. It looks like allowing yourself to disappoint people. I want to linger here because this single skill, more than any other, will determine whether you spend the rest of your life being fed upon or finally living as a whole person with light to spare rather than light to lose. You have spent your entire life terrified of disappointing others because somewhere in your history, disappointing someone carried a cost too large for a child to safely bear. But you are not a child anymore. You can survive someone's disappointment. You can survive someone's anger at your boundary. You can survive being called selfish by a person who has never once, in the entire history of your relationship, asked what you needed. Their disappointment is not an emergency. It is simply weather passing through, and you are allowed to let it pass without rearranging your entire life to prevent it from ever forming. I want to say something now about solitude because it is the missing piece in almost every conversation about protecting your energy, and it is the piece I consider most essential. You have likely been told by well-meaning people that the solution to being drained is simply to spend more time with good people, supportive people, reciprocal people, people who give back as generously as you give. This is true, and it is good advice, and I do not dismiss it. But it is incomplete because it still locates your wholeness in relationship to other people. It still makes your peace conditional on finding the right company. There is a deeper solution, and it is this. You must learn to be replenished by your own company. You must build deliberately a relationship with solitude that is not lonely but nourishing. Time spent with no one's needs to track, no one's emotional weather to monitor, no one's crisis to hold, where the only person whose inner world you are attending to is your own. For most sensitive people, this is unfamiliar territory, almost frightening in its quiet, because a lifetime of hypervigilance toward others has left very little practice in simply being with oneself. But this solitude is where you will finally hear the parts of yourself that have been shouted over for years by everyone else's louder need. It is where the shadow work actually happens. It is where you refill, not from the outside, through someone else's approval or gratitude, but from the inside, through your own undivided attention to your own life. Guard this solitude the way you would guard something sacred, because it is exactly that. Not everyone will understand your need for it. Some of the very people who have been feeding on you will resent it most fiercely of all, will call you distant, will call you selfish, will accuse you of changing, and in a sense, they will be right. You will be changing. You will be becoming, for the first time in your life, a person who belongs to herself, to himself first, and to others second, by choice rather than by an old and exhausted reflex. I want to close with something that I have come to believe, after everything I have witnessed, is the deepest truth underneath all of this. You were not given this sensitivity as a punishment, and you were not given it either so that you could spend your entire life as fuel for other people's unfinished business. You were given it because the world, in truth, is desperately short on people who can feel, really feel, the suffering of others, and act from that feeling with tenderness rather than indifference. This is not a small gift. In a species that has spent most of its history perfecting the art of not noticing the pain it causes, you are one of the rare few who cannot look away. That capacity, rightly used, rightly protected, rightly channeled, is one of the most powerful forces available to a human life. It heals marriages. It raises children who feel truly seen. It changes rooms, changes conversations, changes the entire emotional climate of the people fortunate enough to be near it. But a gift unguarded is not a gift. It is simply an open wound with a beautiful name. The same sensitivity that lets you feel a stranger's grief across a room is the sensitivity that, unprotected, will let anyone with an unfinished shadow walk straight through you and help themselves to your peace like it was left out for the taking. You do not have to choose between being closed and being consumed. That is the false choice you have been living inside for years, perhaps your entire life. There is a third way, and it is the way I have been describing this entire hour. To become so whole, so grounded in your own shadow and your own light together, that your empathy becomes a chosen offering rather than an involuntary leak. A door you open on purpose for people who have earned entry rather than a door with no lock at all, standing open to anyone who happens to walk by hungry. You are not required to burn yourself down to keep other people warm. You are not required to interpret every person's need as your emergency. You are not required to mistake your own exhaustion for love, or your own silence for peace, or your own resentment for patience. You are allowed, finally, after everything, to be a whole person, light and shadow, yes and no, generous and guarded, feeling everyone's pain and still coming home each night to a self that has not been given away. Go and become that whole person. The world needs your light far too much to let it keep being spent on those who were never going to give anything back. Guard the flame. Let it warm the ones who deserve to stand near it, and let everyone else find their own way home, in their own darkness, without asking you to burn yourself down to light their path. That is the warning, and it is also, if you let it be, the beginning of your freedom.